All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, Dan Gardoqui, special guest.
Thank
I'm
you.
Molly, I'm Molly Songas with Audubon, California. This is the last webinar in our three-part series on bird sits and bird language. And today's topic is mimicry, how to imitate 5 bird songs with our special guest, Dan Gardoqui, who's a bird language expert and a very talented bird mimic. If you have missed the previous webinars or want to watch them again, we have uploaded them to the Audubon California YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and you search for Audubon California, Audubon CA is our handle, you'll find them there. So while we're letting folks join us and giving everyone a few minutes, please type into the chat, either on the Zoom or on Facebook, what is the first bird you saw today? What is its name, if you know, or what does it look like? So what's the first bird you saw today? Second question is, how are your bird sits going? Are you doing them? What's happened? Do you have any stories to tell? So please type into the chat how your bird sits are going. If this is your first webinar with us and you've missed the last few weeks, a bird sit is basically a mindfulness practice with a focus on birds. And it provides a lot of the same benefits as a lot of meditation does, reducing stress, cultivating a sense of inner peace. And in this practice, it also connects us deeply to birds and allows them to reveal a little bit more of their secret language to us through this practice. And it's a little bit different from more traditional birding where we go out and walk. It's really about sitting down in one place and letting the birds come to us. And it's especially a great companion for the times we're in, where we really need to shelter in place. We can really have an amazing experience, even out a window, in our backyard, in a local park, wherever we're safe, to really connect with birds and get a lot of those mindfulness benefits at the same time. So just to do a quick review, and again, we're hearing from folks the first bird they saw today, and a little stories from how your bird sits are going, please share in the chat. So again, the 5 steps of a bird sit. The first is to pick a spot, again, somewhere very convenient, by a window, a backyard, local park, wherever you're safe to do so. Pick a nice spot that you can repeatedly visit. Step 2, take a seat, get comfy, bring a drink, a chair, whatever, so you're comfortable sitting. Step 3 is awaken our senses. We tune in to our sight, the sounds, the feelings that we're having, the tastes on our tongue, the smells in the air. It helps us to really activate ourselves and both connect deeply to ourselves and become more able to be aware of what's happening with the birds in our world. And that's step 4, tune into the birds. And we talked a lot about the voices of the birds, the behaviors. Dan will review a little bit of that today. But while you're tuning in, you're just saying, who's out there? What birds are around you? What are they doing? What are they saying? What's the mood of the birds? Are they running for their lives and afraid? Are they feeding and nesting? We're in like the spring heyday right now, where there's lots of fledglings. You might be hearing little baby birds repeatedly calling for their parents' attention. There's a lot to tune into. So just starting to notice what is out there, what's the activity. And we can also check in with ourselves as we're doing the practice, because sometimes our own feelings and emotions will reflect what's happening in the bird world. So we can really look for that mirroring effect. And step 5, repeat. The best benefits come from repetition. So the deepest relaxation, the deepest sense of security in our spots, the deepest connection to the birds, and the deepest insights into what they're talking about. And I wanted to just share one quick story from my bird sits and bird walks this week, where I was walking with my 1-year-old daughter, our morning walk, and we spotted our neighborhood Cooper's hawk. Again, we've talked about this creature, a very fast, dangerous hawk for the bird world, and is a key character in a lot of bird language stories because it creates such a ripple effect of alarm and response from the bird world, rightly so, because it can kill 12 to 13 songbirds a day when it needs to feed babies. So we're talking a really incredible apex predator, and we saw one in our neighborhood, and we were looking at this top of the cedar tree, one of the only cedar trees for blocks, and there it was at the top. And we were just in awe of this Cooper's hawk, just the beauty, the majesty of this exhibitor. And that night I had a dream that I was telling my friends about having spotted my neighborhood Cooper's hawk and how special it was. In my dream, all my friends were on Zoom. It was a very coronavirus, era type of dream. All my friends were on Zoom. And then I looked up all of a sudden, in my dream, the whole thing changed, and I looked up, and there was my Cooper's hawk. My neighborhood Cooper's hawk was right above me in the tree, and she just dropped right in that moment, this beautiful feather, just like whoop, right out, and just like it floated down and it landed in my hand. And I woke up just like stunned at the sense of connection, that like almost like a friendship. It was like a gesture of friendship, and that I was seeing her and she was seeing me back. And it was really powerful. So you might be finding that in this practice, it's more than just, oh, what are the birds up to? You might be really coming into contact with a particular bird or a few birds or a type of bird that you really feel strongly connected to. So a question for you, feel free to share in the chat. Is there a bird that's emerging from this practice for you, or one that's been with you a long time that you feel a deep bond with? And that is, again, one of the benefits of this type of practice. And we are in the midst of a 30-day bird sit challenge. So between now and May 22nd, we're inviting everyone to do a bird sit for each day until May 22nd. And again, it can be 1 minute. That's great. 1 minute, and that counts. But if you would like to join us for a guided practice, you can check us out on Instagram Live Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1 p.m. Our handle is AudubonCA, so come on and join us. And let's just check in the chat real fast before I introduce Dan and kick it off. We got
a lot of good stuff.
What do you got?
We got all sorts of good stuff. We got people doing sit spots, in their yard, on college campuses, downtown, doing bird sits all over the place. And we've also got, such a variety. We have people, a lot of people obviously here from California today, but we have people from other parts of the country, the Midwest, the upper Midwest, the Northeast, the Southeast. So we've got all sorts of things. And we've got a few people telling a lot of little stories about birds they've been connecting with, whether it's black phoebes or mockingbirds or Cooper's hawks or, Buick's wrens, black-headed grosbeak. I'm just seeing a lot of these, these neighbors, these birds that are part of our lives, even more so for some of us right now. So enjoying seeing that connection in the brief stories.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Dan, well, let me introduce you. For those who don't know
Sure.
you yet, Dan Gardoqui is a bird language expert and science editor of What the Robin Knows, How Birds Reveal Nature's Secret. And Dan has been teaching, that book. And Dan has been teaching bird language for about 30 years to people of all ages, and he's been teaching on 3 continents. So he's one of the best in the world that we can find to teach us about bird sits and bird language. And today, Dan runs Lead with Nature, a nature-based consulting organization, and he's joining us from Maine today. And Dan, I have to say, I chose the mockingbird here.
Mm-hmm.
Latin name Mimus polyglottos, meaning many-tongued mimic. And adult males, as you may know, can emit over 200 noises, including birdsong, car alarms, squeaky gates. And if you live near one, they sing all through the night. And I was up at 3 a.m. Listening to my mockingbird going, and then I was like, where have I heard that before? And I was like, oh my gosh, my 1-year-old daughter goes, beep, boop, beep. It was like her first words, beep, boop, beep, beep, boop, beep. Nice. And I never knew where that tone came from. And I realized in the middle of the night, the mockingbird was her first teacher and how to verbalize. So there you go. This is my the totem of the day. Our mascot.
Awesome. Fabulous. Well, hey, folks, thanks for showing up here today. Looks like we've got quite a posse. And where I am calling from today is the great state of, we call Maine these days. Some, traditional territories of a number of indigenous tribes here in the Northeast, the Wabanaki people. And it's a gorgeous spring budding unfolding happening in front of us right now. Everything is just popping. Our little black flies, these little buffalo gnats are hatched out, which means a lot of those birds moving north are now starting to get a lot of good feed. And so just over the course of the last few days, we've had so many quote unquote new arrivals, birds that come every year to breed here, to take advantage of the northern climate in the northern part of the temperate forest. And some are on their way all the way up to the Arctic and beyond. And we have this abundance of little flies. And so a lot of our warblers are showing up. And this morning I heard my first. So that's one that I don't think you guys get on the West Coast. We get a lot of different variety of wood warblers in the East, but then also, which is one I know you have out there. So Anyway, warblers are exciting and showing up. The thrushes are making a racket. They're starting to sing, which is a beautiful thing. So I'm really just grateful for the spring and that we're all here today. And hopefully you folks are feeling well and you're engaged to learn. So thank you for your time and attention, and we'll do our best to use it well. So Molly just did a quick recap on the 5 steps to a bird sit. I just want to do a quick recap on the 5 voices of birds. And the first one we're gonna start with is a song. And actually, I'll just do one I just did. So kind of the mnemonic for this one is witchity, 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 witchity. So I'll kind of an up and down sound. That is the song of the common yellowthroat. We'll get into how to mimic these in a little bit. So that's the first one. Remember, song was happy voice. And then we have the kind of chatty voice, or the call note. Some people call them contact calls, companion calls, things like that. And let's go with our dark-eyed Junco. Very hard, high-pitched sound, very slight. If you're not listening for it, you probably will miss it. It's kind of like, can you guys hear that? Molly, can you hear that? Very, very thin whistle. Right, but that you don't want it to be too loud, and they'll also flash their tail feathers at the same time. So juncos are a ground-feeding flocking bird, and so they keep using their peripheral vision, with their eyes on the side of the head. That's a lot easier than us, but they can see quite far around them, and they can just see that little white flash happening along with that kind of like a chip, not that high. Anyway, so so there's one of our chatty calls. And then we had our third call we call our Crabby Call, or a crabby voice, which is kind of a voice of aggression. And that's when birds are kind of really getting in each other's business. Often it's males, often it's during breeding season, but it could be any bird, any time of year, any place. And around here, one of my favorite is you get the, and that's a pretty cranky robin. Our fourth voice is we call the hungry voice, or the voice of begging. And right now, in many parts of the country, the young of our largest members of the corvid family, who's up here in my logo over my shoulder, big fan of the corvids, jays, crows, all those guys, ravens, nutcrackers. The young ravens have fledged. So the young ravens are just fledging. They've left the nest, and now they're kind of starting to follow the parents around. They look smaller. They got funny feather patterns. And you, instead of hearing the classic, you hear more like a, oh man, it's crazy. So that's our little hungry voice. That's a little crow following mom and dad around, really wanting their attention and often food. And let's see, the fifth voice we talked about last week was the scary voice, and that's the voice of alarm. That's when things aren't quite okay, when there is imminent danger nearby, or likely danger nearby, and they have to let each other know. And so a lot of birds use a very high-pitched version of alarm known as a seat call, like try to. It's thin, it's hard to locate, it's kind of ventriloquial, that's hard to locate. So really high, thin, high-pitched call. A number of thrushes in Northern Europe will do this. Our American robin does it as well. A number of birds will use seat calls. So there's a quick recap of those 5 voices. I'm going to tell you a little bit about mimicry. But before I do that, I just wanted to do a little shameless self-plug here. I'm just launching a new online learning course I'm really excited about called Talking with Birds. And it's going to be a 4-week journey in connecting in small groups with a little mentoring, a little optional assignments and challenges between the weeks. So if it's something you're interested in, you can go to leadwithnature.com. That's my website. And under our Learn tab, you'll find more info there. So learning with birds, I'm going to have a West Coast flock and an East Coast flock, so it can be more time sensitive and thoughtful to your schedules. Anyway, how did I become a mimic? What is this mimic thing all about? Ever since I was really young, and Molly encouraged me to tell this story because she said, well, just, why do you do this? I started thinking about what got me into mimicking birds. And really, it was not birds. It was just being a kid and making noises. Sometimes to the frustration of those around me. I was a little bit high energy. I was a little bit, some would say annoying. Some would say distracting. I wasn't the easiest kid in the classroom per se. But I remember from a very young age, I remember I used to go visit my grandmother, who was she was an immigrant and living in Brooklyn, in New York City. And she had a job where she would iron towels for a restaurant. all the time. So these big bins would come with these towels that were just laundered, and she would do all the ironing, and she was very, very good at it. And I used to sit next to her and talk to her, or like watch TV or play games or little toys out and stuff. And I remember just sitting there and making this noise like, and just I'd always be mimicking the iron. She would just laugh. She thought it was funny. And then I remember Mom worked at office once, and there was this copier machine like, and I'd get into the rhythm. I'd actually kind of start dancing a little bit next to the copier, and the people in the office just shake their head like, that kid's kind of weird. But I just enjoyed mimicking things. To me, it was like an interesting way to connect with them. So did a bunch of that, and then and also at the time, I grew up in the 1980s, so like beatbox culture was just coming around, and I'm not going to attempt to really beatbox, but I was really into just making all sorts of funny noises. So I was into that, and then I had an auntie who gave me a pair of binocs and a bird book, and around the same time I met a science teacher who became an important mentor in my life, and I remember her just telling me like, oh, there's big owls in the woods out here. And I was like, what? And she was visiting me. She lived in the city. She lived in New York City, and I lived in New Jersey in the countryside kind of. And she was saying, oh, there's these really big owls. Check them out. And so she showed me a picture of a great horned owl, right? One of our biggest, most common owls here in North America. Just a beast of an owl, huge, strong, especially those females. They're just monsters. They're amazing. And I was like, I want to see one of those, I really want to see one. And I remember I would just wander around this little park with this beat up old pair of binocs looking for owls. And I eventually found one. And I found it because I heard it first. And she kind of told me what it would sound like. And, it's an owl. You kind of know maybe what it sounds like. When I was a kid, I kind of knew. And I remember I just heard this. And I was like, what is that? And I remember just trying to go find this thing. And eventually I figured out where the owls tended to roost during the day. And I found that because of something we talked about last week, which is mobbing, right? As people remember, we're talking about mobbing when birds, a lot of crows especially, but birds would mob around predators they don't like, and they would make a big racket. And so those crows helped me figure out where to find that owl. And so anyway, that's kind of how I started to get into mimicking. Like as I started to learn a few new birds, I always wanted to make the bird sound. I remember once, and I was in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. It's a big, beautiful, wild area. I know it sounds strange for New Jersey, but there is actually over 1 million acres of gorgeous wild forest land, a great aquifer. Anyway, and I was canoeing with a friend, and we stopped at this little sandbar and kind of we're just chilling out, taking a rest. It was a hot day. It was a long paddle. We just got out of a buggy spot, and we were just napping basically. And I remember these cedar waxwings came and flew right over us, and they were eating all the berries. I don't even remember what it was now, but they were eating all the fruit off this small tree. And I just kept hearing, and I heard the little high pitched insecty sound, which I never connected with birds. I was like, that's a bird sound, like the. Like it was almost insecty. So pretty amazing. And so I would always just try and make the sounds as soon as I heard them. And that was a good way for me to just learn the bird. I don't know. I just stuck more in my brain. So that's kind of how I got into it. So Molly, I'm going to jump in here into how to do some mimicking and get prepared. Anything you want to add in before I do that?
Nope. Sounds good. Jump in. We're ready.
Okie doke. All right. So mimicking 101. All right, because this is how to make bird sounds, and bird sounds aren't just whistles. So the first rule of mimicking is that there are no rules. You can do whatever the heck you want. I don't really care, and who cares if anyone else does. Use what you got. To mimic, you can use anything. I mean, if I'm doing like a rough grouse, I'm gonna or something like. I'm gonna use my body because that sounds more like it. If I'm trying to imitate a turkey, I'm gonna take my hat and hit the ground with it like it's wings flapping, whatever I've got. So mimicking isn't just making fancy whistles. I happen to like doing that. I've been practicing for a long time, and people like it, so I do it. But it's really doing anything you can. I also would say body language is kind of fun to play with when you're doing mimicking. I'm trying to imagine, I think about little baby birds feeding. I can't help it if I'm doing like a kind of call. I can't help but picture their mouths open, looking up, and kind of big gaping, orange and yellow mouths, kind of, yeah. So using your body sometimes when you're doing these things can be kind of fun. Really, sometimes you'll find that certain calls are going to be to require the use of your diaphragm. You know, like sometimes the deeper calls, like ooh, we'll get into that. You know, yeah, and so the last thing I would say is just play with it, like have fun with it, be curious about it, engage. You know, it can be a little, if you're shy, it can be a little strange or embarrassing. So you know, maybe you'll do it by yourself. But if not, I encourage you to do it with with some other people and just mess around. And it doesn't really matter if you get it right or wrong. There's no, it's just mimicking. All right. So in order, before we dive in to the actual sounds here, you should be prepared. So I would suggest you have something liquid nearby. A glass of water works very well because you're gonna have to wet your lips now and again. Or you might make some sounds that irritate your throat. These are the risks of mimicry. If you have a small mirror nearby, that can actually be really helpful, or even a big mirror. So if you can see your face and what you're trying to do, it actually sometimes can be really helpful. I've got this mic kind of blocking my view. I'll try and show my face too when I'm making some of these. But it can be helpful to see someone's like mouth and face when they're making things, especially your own, because you can experiment. And we're not used to staring at our mouth and face and our tongue and all that kind of stuff usually, probably. But it can be helpful in figuring these things out. And last, I would just encourage you to be prepared is to invite someone to kind of mess around with you, especially if you got kids around, but anyone really. Okay, so let's talk about whistling, which is one form of mimicry and imitation. There are, as far as I know, 3 components for me to whistling that are important for mimicry. So the first one is your mouth position. So if I'm just sitting here, I'll move the mic just a little bit away. If you can't hear me, just let me know, Molly. I could sit here and my mouth can just be in a normal resting position. If I take my lips and I make like a kissy face, you know, kind of like your fishy face when you're a little kid, you know, that already makes your lips, it already changes the whole flow and shape of your mouth. It's going to change a sound that comes out when you eventually start moving air. So the first thing is mouth positions. You just want to be conscious of it. There's not like a right mouth position, but you're going to mess around with your mouth, especially your lips. Like when you do this a lot, you actually will get a little sore. Like at the end of this, hopefully you'll have like a little bit of cheek pain from laughing at me and yourself and practicing. So that's number 1, mouth position. Number 2 is going to be airflow. So it's kind of like belly buttons. There's innies and there's outies. Like everyone does different things. So some people like to just whistle out or in. In general, I find in whistling can go deeper. You can mess around with this. You can even just make a real simple sound right now, like just whistle like a wee. Or you can try in and you can try out. If you're sitting there going, I don't even know how to whistle, don't worry about it. Just keep messing around. Even if you sound like this, that's okay. You're learning. You figure it out. Yeah. People are saying I can't whistle at all. You can't whistle at all right now, maybe. But if you keep practicing, you will learn to whistle. It is possible for the vast majority of us to figure this out. Probably, maybe not just today, but you can get a good start. So the last thing after mouth position, airflow, is tongue. So you're going to use, this could be some funny screenshots from this. You're going to use your tongue to make all sorts of shapes. And the thing about your tongue is if you imagine your tongue, here's a little pad of sticky notes I have. If this is like my tongue, say my tongue was square. If I were to, here's my tongue. At some point, you're going to take your tongue and you're going to curl it in like this. So you get sound flowing over the middle of your tongue. At other times, you're going to put it up like that on the roof of your mouth. So if you can whistle, or if you're trying today, just try a basic like, just in like a weep, weep kind of noise. And if you try to just do a basic whistle, in order to do the weep, anything that goes up or down, you have to keep moving your tongue. So if you just start with let's start with a very bland, boring, just. And if you can't whistle right now, just make the noise. You can even hum it or just say it like, now start wiggling your tongue. Or if it's whistle, that's how you kind of get a whinny sound. You may be familiar with screech owls. Kind of sound like a horse. It's kind of cool. So that is basically those are the three basics of the whistle: the mouth position, the airflow, and the tongue itself. So let's think about a pretty common kind of bird sound. Let's go with red-tailed hawks, right? That's pretty common hawk for review, Molly. You see red-tails pretty often or no?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll
Very
tell you.
often.
So one of our most common kind of roadside birds, you see in Sarah. Red tails are very famous because for some reason their sound always gets in like soundtracks of film and media, and you see like a bird circling around. Sometimes it's a vulture that they make, and you'll hear that kind of. So you can whistle this one sometimes. I tend to do as an out whistle. So what I'm doing for this one is I'm putting my tongue up. So I'm taking the tongue, I'm folding it up like this towards the roof of my mouth, right? Kind of pushing it almost, I'm pushing it along the sides of my teeth, and I'm letting air flow. The air is kind of flowing up and over and then back down. But if you just mess around with your tongue and move it when you're making like a whistle, you can sometimes get a. Now, your teeth do affect your mouth sounds. So sometimes you'll find that depending on your teeth and what situation they're in, if you're missing some, if that can match. Sometimes you have to move your mouth a little bit to get your teeth in the way or out of the way to make the whistle sound. Yeah, that's a really high pitch one, but if I block my gap, I can't do it as well. So sometimes these are very individual tweaks we're going to make because we all have different mouths. Okay. All right. So let's take some real common birds and let's kind of, we'll even go through the 5 voices while we do these, more or less probably. Okay. So the first one we're going to do doesn't require whistling, but you kind of can whistle it. It is the song of Modo, the mourning dove. And the mourning dove is one of my favorite lovely birds. One of the most tenacious nesters, even though their nest itself doesn't look all that special. But that nest is actually pretty amazing because it doesn't really attract a lot of attention. It's just a few things thrown together. But they never leave that, man. They just sit on that nest. But before they nest, right, which right now they're doing here is they're courting a lot. So you may know that the sound, it's the first sound Molly and I actually did to each other as a greeting when we had our first webinar a few weeks ago. And there's a couple ways to do it. So you can whistle like a. So that one I'm doing in, but you could do. I'm doing an out one. I can't do it as well doing out, but it's that. This is awesome. People are learning that they can actually whistle one way versus the other. They didn't know they could whistle in or out, but most people didn't know you could whistle in, but you can usually. So the mourning dove, you guys all try this on your own. So however you want to do it, you can try that, but it's a kind of like that. You may be familiar with it. How's that one going? And you can even just do a chesty kind of hummy noise, like I'm kind of cooing out. It's almost like have you ever tried to do a dog bark? Like blowing air from your diaphragm up through your lungs and out your mouth. Almost like if you punch yourself in the belly, like that. Like that. Like, that's how I do most of my owl noises, actually. Like, right, so they come from really down low. All right. That's Modo, the mourning dove. Yes, someone says their dog is very intrigued by the sounds. Sweet. That means you're doing a great job. Keep going. Yeah. Some people works in, some people works out. Probably one of my favorite songs and probably one I do the most, and sometimes I do it even when I'm just not consciously thinking about it, is a song that we'll do next. And it's one of the most common birds in North America. And it is the bird on the cover of this book, What the Robin Knows. So Turdus migratorius, the American robin. The male has a darker head than the female. You may have noticed this or maybe not. Look for it. It's kind of interesting. The males, often in the breeding season, which they're in, I'm sure where you are, most of you are calling from today, they'll actually at night, here's a good question, a little challenge for you. What do the males do at night? Where do they go? If mom's sitting on the eggs, assuming she is, it's not always the case. Sometimes they share. Sometimes the males do most, but in the robins, it's usually the females. Where do the males go at night? Well, when they wake up in the morning, I'll tell you, and they make a racket, by the way, where they go at dusk. They always make a racket. But when they wake up in the morning, they sing like crazy. And so their dawn song is a faster version of the normal song. So we're just going to start with the normal American Robin song. And their phrasing is kind of like cheerily, cheery up, cheerio, cheerily, cheerloo, cheerily, cheery up, cheerio, kind of like that. That's what you kind of see in books and stuff. You could put any mnemonic words you want to that. But so it kind of is going to be I do this when whistling out. So it'd be like, oh, so hold on. Take me a second. So I'm doing a kind of a very breathy, small whistle. My mouth's almost closed. I'm whistling down over my lip. My tongue is pushed on the sides of my mouth again, kind of mess around. And sometimes if it's a little warmer out, and if it's colder or it's early morning, sometimes they'll mix in a little in the middle of that too, especially early in the morning. I mean, some of these birds this time of year, like literally the reproductive organs, the gonads can take up, you know, a fifth of their body mass. I mean, it's crazy. They are very, very testosterone driven right now. And so their desire to sing and to, you know, hold these territories. And I mean, it's pretty wild. They're very driven. So, yeah, so the American Robin. Now let's try it a loud one, like a, that's an in whistle. It's a little trickier. Oh, nice. Someone was just talking about mockingbirds, and someone actually asked about night birds too. And Molly was telling a story earlier on that yes, one of the most common birds to sing through the night is the Northern Mockingbird. Mockingbird is known because it can mimic anything, and often it does phrases with usually 3 or more. So around here, it might be like. It almost sounds like an old, like a late 1900s car alarm. But yeah, the mockingbird is just, yeah. And the mockingbird, the more songs that they can have, the bigger their repertoire, often the more likely they are to find a successful mate, is how it usually works. So they like to show off and make some songs. All right, let's do another common sound here. We went with mourning dove, went with American robin. Earlier on, I was doing a contact call of the Junco, but let me see. Let's do a little sparrow contact call. So where the Junco call is very high pitched and thin, which can be hard for some people to do, like almost like a sit, T-S-I-T. Let's not do that one right now. Let's do more of a like a chip call, like so the air gets cut off by you closing your lips really fast. So when sparrows are often feeding, like say your white-crowned sparrows, or white-throated or a song, or but often our flocking sparrows, they will communicate a lot to each other. Again, visually with tail flashes, sometimes wing flashes and other things. Also through the sounds of feeding, they're listening to each other as the flock moves around. But they will do very quiet little kind of chip calls, like. So I'm doing these out, and I'm kind of forcing air, and then quickly closing my tongue to the roof of my mouth. So like, actually, I'm closing my lips. Sorry. So it's like a out X word. Now, if you heard that noise really fast and very frequent, like, and you watch the bird's body language, that call can turn into an alarm. And that's true of a lot of our birds. And that's in ornithology, we call those graded vocalizations, meaning that the call, the sound itself can have very different meanings depending on context. That's all. Okay, so that's a little sparrow contact call. Let's do another contact call. You have both lesser and American goldfinches out there in California, and most of us, the rest of the country, have the American goldfinch too. They have pretty similar high-pitched kind of calls, but they do a lot of flight calls, which is kind of neat. And they have this flight that's kind of an undulating flight or a shooting flight. kind of like this. They don't just fly straight, right? And they kind of shoot. And as they flap, they kind of go up, and then they lose a little speed, and they go down, they shoot again. And often what we'll hear when they do that, especially with the American goldfinch, is, and that's a chip. They say it's like potato chip. So you can go chip, chip, chip. And if you can't whistle, you can say chip, 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 chip. And if you can whistle, and really fast. Now that's different from when there's a perched in a group and they're singing like, that's kind of their song when they're together. These are just little flight calls, contact calls, especially when flocks are moving around. They tend to stay pretty tight, but now and again they get busted up, and so they have to kind of pay attention to where each other's, where they are located, the rest of the group. Okay, let's think. So along these, and you might be saying, well, some of these sound pretty similar. And this is true. Some of these do sound similar. I mean, we can get into really weird birds, like, picture yourself. Here's a quiz for you. You can put this one, you can type into the chat if you have a guess. So say you're somewhere near water. There's your hint. And you get too close to a bird, and all of a sudden you hear, sorry, that wasn't very good. This is a bird that doesn't have doesn't have a syrinx, like the voice box, like all the songbirds do. I'm looking at the guesses: coot, night heron, goose. Yeah, let me try. And one of you is very close. Yes, great blue heron. Thank you. I was trying for a great blue heron. Not my best one. Sorry, water went down the wrong pipe. That happens. Hazard of the business. So yeah, so there are a number of birds that sound really different. Right? You all know that one, right? Right? And that's actually often a duet. A lot of people don't know that. Canada goose is two birds. Often, sometimes it's a male and a female. They can make quite an interesting little duetting. Yeah. Okay. So there's some. I want to mess here. Let's mess around with. We did the immature crow. Ravens are a fascinating bird. So crows or ravens, we can kind of mess with here. When those birds are alarmed, they are they're either very vocal or they're just very sneaky and quiet and just get away. But a typical kind of, our raven, you might, because I'm like but ravens make so many noises, but the crow might have the more, or if you're coastal, we have coastal crows that are even higher pitched and nasally, like, and then we have American crows that are, and then we have ravens that are more like, right? So you kind of these different pitches. And you could see, I'm actually grabbing my nose and doing weird things because it's not just about whistling. It's just figure out how can I try and make that weird sound. And it takes a bunch of messing around to do it. But anyway, you got some ravens and they're all upset. You got some crows and they're all upset. So I want you to try and make upset crow or raven noises on the count of three, okay? It doesn't matter how you do it. 1, 2, 3. Right, and that takes a flock. If only we could all hear all the noises we're all making right now, that'd been pretty cool. Let's see, we have at least, I don't know, about 250 people on Zoom alone. I don't know how many are on Facebook, but there's probably cats and dogs just going, what is going on right now? And you got to remember that that's for a reason. Like we said in the seminar earlier, we all have the ability we are born with the ability to understand this. This is hardwired into our being. And that goes for the animals we share our homes with too, right? Our pets, they know this stuff too, often. So they'll often pay attention to it. And the wildlife have to pay attention to them. So, yeah, because they're some dogs and pretty much all cats are trouble to a lot of birds. And they have to know these things, as do other critters, the ground squirrels and the tree squirrels. They have to know what dogs are troublesome dogs who might actually go after them and potentially kill them, and which ones are just, I don't have to worry about that dog. And they will be alarming too and making different vocalizations. So there's some common bird sounds, international and local to the West Coast. There's a little review of some components of whistle. I just want to take some time now for questions because I'm sure there's some interesting questions that folks may have. So I will pass it back to Molly. Take a sip.
All right, Dan, we've got a question from Bree Brown, do you need to do any vocal training in order to recreate so many different sounds to learn how to manipulate your vocal cords, etc.?
I don't even know what that means. No is a short answer. No, I've never had any sort of training of any sort to make any noises. And I don't think it might be helpful for some people. I mean, I don't know, but for me, it's nothing I've ever done.
We just had to imitate whatever household noises, like the irons and whatever inspires us at
Oh
any
yeah,
given moment. Seems like
yeah,
practice is key in believing in our
yeah,
ability to find those little pitches.
yeah.
A question from Gabriella. How would one greet a local raven crow?
Boy, Gabriella, great question. The short answer is I don't know. It really depends. You got to get to know your local birds themselves and start. I would encourage you, if you're willing to put in the time, start to try and keep a little journal, whether it's audio recordings or just on pen and paper, the different noises they make or the number of times they make different noises and what you're seeing, because you have to almost decode their language. There is some interesting research on this, and there are some generic truths about what the different caws or different noises they make and what they often mean. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know your local crows, but I know I try and get the attention of crows and ravens quite a bit. Sometimes by not making any noise. Sometimes by intentionally, like for instance, I was out. We have a big pond out by where I live that freezes super solid, so it's safe to go out there at times. And this winter is frozen solid and it's pure white with snow covering it. Kind of picture this: big trees and rocks all around the edges. And I heard ravens coming from far away, so I decided to lay down in the middle of the ice like I was dead, just to be ridiculous and stupid and see what happened, because ravens often investigate dead things. And I just laid there sprawled out, and I cut out of the corner of my eye. I'm watching the ravens come over, and the first I could hear their wings. Another one. And the third one comes in, swoops, and goes, and then goes away. So it just kind of like checked me out. I was like, yeah, I see you. It just got this vibe of like, yeah, nice try, buddy. So I'm always trying to play with them and figure out what's going on. Right now, there's crows that finished feed. They're still feeding their young, but for the last 2 weeks, they've been in and out of our little compost pile, getting everything they can and bringing it back to their nest. And I often would try and follow them, but if they watch and they see that I'm following them, they always go different ways and they always ditch me. It's really cool. So I just like to play and interact with them. And some, and maybe you could even just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, just feel it out too. Like, what does it feel like in your body when they make different noises? Sometimes that can inform you as well.
All right, Fenton says, have birds ever gathered around you while you're singing?
Oh God, yeah. Yes, I mean, yeah. So sometimes I will use. It's really interesting. So before there were things like smartphones and interactive playback, where we can sit here and we can get on an app and play a bird sound. If we do that too much, as many of you may know, that can be traumatic or distracting or problematic for a lot of birds. It's not considered a best practice. There's certain guidelines that the American Birding Association recommends, yada yada. For me, as a natural mimic, I have to do the same thing. If I sit here and start going, during scarlet tanager breeding season, I'll get a male to come right in and he'll be upset. Or, a titmouse. Certain birds are very, very territorial and very susceptible to harassment and agitation. So I have to use that skill a little carefully. But it is sometimes fun to just kind of, to just sit and let the birds kind of see how they respond. And often I just don't like to make any sounds. I just want to be there and let the birds make their sounds.
We've asked, there's a question about the ethics of calling in the presence of birds. Can you just say a little bit more about that while you're on the topic?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not under any illusion that, yeah, it can be very disturbing to birds. Making bird sounds can be disturbing to birds. So knowing where and when and how often to do these things is important. If there's birds I'm feeding in my backyard regularly, and they're there and they're feeding, they're coming and going, and they're resting in a bush, and I want to start to practice and listening to those sounds, I'll make those sounds. Excuse me. If I'm in a more, say, remote area or near a bird's nest, like I'll try not to do that in those places. Just like I won't follow a bird like to its nest and like hang out and watch and point at it, because then other birds are going to see that, and other animals might see that, and that might put that bird's nest at risk. it can be very stressful for the bird to feel like there's another bird in its territory of its kind that may be trying to compete with it. So that's why we do our best to limit the amount of interactive kind of times we might have with the birds. So it's very seasonal. Where I live, I do a lot of wildlife tracking too. And so for instance, if I'm leading a group of people on a tracking walk, I won't trail a bobcat forward on its tracks during breeding season because I don't want to upset a breeding pair of bobcats. That's just not a good idea, especially if they're trying to have babies. So I'll backtrack, or I won't even track that animal during the breeding season. I'll track, say, deer, because by that time of the year, they're doing something else, yada, yada. Hope that makes sense.
Question from Cherry. Are there other animals besides birds that will imitate other birds?
Yes, especially in other parts of the world, and I may be forgetting local. Let me think here. Well, here's a good thing to know is that often there are animals that sound a lot like birds that we mistake as birds quite regularly. Where I live, we have a chipmunk, eastern chipmunk, and his that's his alarm for ground predators. There's a ground predator coming, chipmunk's gonna, and you get really close, right down into its hole. If there's an aerial predator, both of those sound a lot like birds. So it's easy to confuse certain squirrels and in other parts of the world, certain primates, monkeys. I mean, there's a lot of things you can confuse as bird sounds, even though they're not birds sometimes. But yeah, there are some other primates that mimic birds at times. There are other birds that mimic other birds. The jays are a great example of that here in North America. Yeah, and there's probably others I'm not. Maybe people can fill into the chat. There's others I'm sure I'm forgetting.
What about suggestions from Mary for mimicry with kids? There's a lot of folks that say have very musical and talented young people at home.
Cool.
What would you suggest for getting them started on some mimicry?
Play. Yeah. So, yeah. Maybe coming up with some creative little games. Maybe go watch a video or two of a certain bird that you have right in your yard, or sit in if you have the birds there. If you have, whether it's feeders or they're just naturally there, you could sit out and listen to them and try and make those sounds. You could create like a top 5, like, bird playlist. Like, what are your favorite birds to listen to? If they're skilled with, making electronic music and sounds, they could actually like sample in birds into music, which is kind of fun for older kids. But yeah, I mean, let them be curious and play around with them. Yeah, and see which ones they're really drawn to. Like, what birds kind of grab their attention. Which birds do they find they might have special kinship with versus others, and maybe explore that a little bit.
Andy in Atascadero, I'm a professional singer and flutist. It helps to know how to breathe from the diaphragm. Example, yogic prana. Also download some recorded songs from Cornell and listen and practice. Can you comment on that?
I think that's great advice. Totally. Yeah. And I was mentioning that with certain birds like the owls and the deeper ones. Yeah, I'm definitely, without knowing all the language, over the years, people have told me, oh, you're doing this breathing. I was like, oh, cool. I didn't know that. So yeah, definitely. I'm learning to become more consciously competent about how to do this. But yeah, that sounds like great advice from Andy, including downloading sounds or just watching short videos. There's like an entire YouTube channel like to play. I think it's supposed to be meant for cats, which people aren't going to like, but so to keep them entertained when people aren't home, and it's like birds all hanging out, and it's just really, but it has really cool bird interaction going on. So I've watched it a couple of times. It's kind of fun.
Awesome. And Allison has shared a resource, Birdsong Hero Game from Cornell.
Yes.
Seems like a great place. Have you played with that before?
Long time ago when it first came out. Yeah, I definitely checked it out. And the earlier version, I was like, meh. But then I saw the upgrade and I was like, oh, this is better for sure. I mean, it's kind of playing off the old Guitar Hero thing. But yeah, I think it's great. And there's probably more people might be throwing a few more in here. Yeah, anyway.
Shelley said, any tips on remembering bird songs and calls? Yeah, how did you go about remembering these scores?
Yeah. I don't remember them all. I'll tell you that right off the bat. Just before I got on, one of the other Audubon staff was talking about a Townsend's warbler. I'm like, oh man, I forgot that one already. It's kind of like a buzzy, I think. But anyway, I don't remember them all, so I have to relearn them. And I go out and listen to them a lot. I also have, I use like iBird Pro. I use the app to remind myself. And I was like, oh yeah, what is that one again? I have some other. I used to listen to a lot of old. cassette tapes and CDs of bird sounds. You know, when I was driving around, or you know, stuff like that. I mean, I would just listen to, like, you know, the Peterson Field Guide series on like warblers, or Birding by Ear by Donald Lillian Stokes, or Lang Elliott's work, Backyard Bird Walk. There's some really great, and there's probably a lot more. I mean, that stuff's pretty dated, but I mean, it's not dated. It's just older, but the birds are still doing the same thing. They're great resources. So yeah, I have to, just like learning a lot of things, you have to keep reinforcing it, or else I'll forget them. But mimicking them does help me, helps me remember them. That's part of the reason why I like to do it. It keeps those birds present in my mind and my heart.
Elizabeth is asking, is the California thrasher imitating, or does he just have a repertoire?
I'm not sure there's a difference. I'm not sure I accept the premise of the question. Yeah, I mean, part of the repertoire of all thrashers is that they're mimicking other things. So yes and yes. And you know, thrashers in particular, the mimic thrushes, the family Mimicidae, they are unbelievable. I mean, they blow most other birds' repertoires out of the water. I think brown thrasher somewhere around 1,200 songs, if I remember right. 1,200 different sounds they can imitate. So yeah, they are mimicking all the sounds they're hearing in their environment. I remember I used to babysit these little kids down the road from me, and I remember something, the kid, he always set this alarm clock off during the day. It was one of those old-fashioned first, like, digital clocks. And, and there was a mockingbird right outside their house that would build into, or sorry, a thrasher that was building into its repertoire this little, because usually it's two with the thrashers around, at least around me. So yeah, I mean, they will pick up all sorts of sounds.
Question from Jess. What kind of call should you make to get the attention of a bird you're trying to identify that's better than the pishing?
Yeah. So all these questions around like ethics, I think we just got to think about our, you know, our agenda. And as a kind of a quote unquote dominant species, humans often act in this way. And I'm not saying everyone here does, but we often will assume that we have the right to do whatever we want with a lot of other critters sometimes. So as we're interacting with these birds, I would just kind of feel it out first. I would say, what feels good right now? How's that bird responding? You know, to me, even just being here. Does that bird seem pretty comfortable? Is that bird doing its baseline kind of behaviors, feeding, preening, resting, singing, you know, things like that, maintaining its family? Yeah, and then so pishing, like kind of noises that a lot of traditional birders would make in order to draw birds out. What is that? Why do people do that? Right? It's because it's imitating an alarm call. It's imitating an alarm call that's saying there's something really dangerous here right now, and you have to see it right now. You know, so all the birds are like, "Oh my God, where's that?" You know, they want to find it, they want to locate it. It gets them very. I mean, if we had little diodes or little you know, little devices on them to indicate what's going on inside their body, we would see raised heart rates, I'm sure, stress levels go up, things like that. So yeah, there's better ways, I would say, to get a bird's attention than to start pishing. I try not to pish. I don't pish very often. It feels very stressful for me. I have empathy for the birds, and I feel their stress, and it just, for me, is I don't know. I'm not a pisher, really. I'm not going to say don't pish or pishers are bad or anything like that, because who am I to say? But just be conscious about it, because what you're doing is, you know, you're causing birds to kind of panic and come out from whatever they're doing. Versus, that's why I love bird sits, because if you just sit for a while, you let the birds come on their own terms. You don't dictate the terms by pulling them out, by basically pulling a fire alarm in their ecosystem that they have to run out of their apartment from. So it's just, you know, it's worth thinking about.
Excellent. We have some requests. Do you know how to do the American Bittern, a rail, a sandhill crane? Any of those you want to share?
Well, let me think. Try to remember my sandhill crane. I could picture a misty meadow in the end of summer in the upper Midwest. Yeah, it's not coming out today. Yeah, the bittern. It's got that. It's not like gunk or plunk. It's like it's a really deep, low sound that comes from a swallow and then in your belly. Kind of like that. Yeah, I don't remember the exact phrasing. I'll have to go back. often right when I hear it, I can do it again. But yeah, it's been a while since I've heard a bittern. I'd like to hear a bittern. They're hard to find where I am.
That was amazing. All
Thanks.
right, Dan. So you took us through a whole lot of different vocalizations. Now, give us our
Yeah,
homework. Can you go back over some of the key sounds or
yeah,
shapes
yeah.
that we want to practice?
Um, yeah, I think first and I would say the even more important than that is to remember that mimicking has no rules, and you can mimic any way. Use all you got. Mimic any way you possibly can. Um, and I'm not saying with all the birds in the field to cause chaos always, but no, while you're practicing and while you're trying to just understand and make the sounds. Um, so I think knowing really just basic contact calls, little high pitched kind of like chips and chats and stuff like that, short, like little tiny out breaths, messing around with your tongue and then shutting your lips. Like if I slow it down, it'd be like. That's a classic, like house sparrow, in front of the grocery store or on the street, things like that. This way you can kind of have a little dialogue, a little back and forth. The contact calls tend not to be as distressing to the birds in my experience. Alarm definitely gets them set off, and song tends to set them off a lot too. Begging would do the same at certain seasons as well. So yeah, I would say mess around with that a little bit. I think some of the deeper ones, I think mourning dove's a great one to practice. I mean, why not? I mean, whether it's it's an inward whistle for me or outward for some. That's a little harder to do. Or just a chesty kind of hummy vocalization versus a whistle. Right. So I think those are fun. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a specific bird. Now, some birds are easier to imitate than others. A lot of our birds that don't have a syrinx, the complex kind of vocal structure, like the voice box of the birds, they can be harder. Like a lot of our phoebes, flycatchers, there's a lot of buzziness to them. And I don't have time to get into how to do buzzy noises. It took me a long time to figure that one out. I don't have time today. But you can layer buzzes into a whistle. So you can go... Like for like thrushy sounds and stuff, you can layer it's almost because that's what they're doing, but they're actually using two different songs at the same time coming up into their vocal box. It's crazy cool. But stick with I'd say stick with the simple ones, the low, like short little contact calls. You have your that's a your California quail, and then they have that crazy alarm call, right? That I can't even do it. Yeah, that one I don't even think you can whistle. Right, that's a great one to listen. That's that. If you if you see that, hear that a whole bunch, and then you hear that the little rally call, look around because there's probably a ground predator somewhere nearby. Right, my friend Dan Fontaine out in Santa Barbara he's taught me that one whenever I'm out west visiting with him. He's always tuned into those little quail. So it's like it's just a quail gathering, but then he's like, no, there's something getting after those quail. So it's kind of fun to listen for. So yeah, I'd say the practice is more in just paying attention, like what bird sounds are around you that you might want to mess around with, which ones sound fun to try. And you're going to find some are just easier for you than others. And that might not be the same ones that are easy for someone else. So get to know a few little birds during some bird sits, start messing around with your mouth and play and have fun.
I'm
Nice.
practicing, Dan.
Yeah, you're getting good, Molly. Yeah.
Oh man, this has been so awesome. Yeah, discovering the whistle and beyond.
Yeah.
And congrats to everyone who discovered the inward whistle, reconnected that part of
Nice
ourselves.
job.
Dan, you're truly a wonder, and we've been so lucky to have you with us, bringing your 30 years of dedicated practice. You've taken us into a window into the world of bird language. You have decoded their language for us. You've taught us how to do a mindful bird sit so we can bring the birds to us. We've been so lucky to be with you. And again, for all of you that are now the biggest fans of Dan as I am, you can continue to learn from him. There is an upcoming webinar series with Christy Dranginis, and also an amazing bird language expert through 8 Shields and through Lead with Nature. You have multiple opportunities. And Dan, do you want to say anything about that for those that didn't hear at the beginning?
Yeah, I'm really excited I'm amassing a West Coast flock. My East Coast flock just pretty much filled. I think I have one spot left. But small groups, maybe like a dozen people, and we'll have weekly calls diving into the nuance of bird language and how to talk with birds, kind of better understand what they're saying, how we can interact with them in reciprocal ways, and getting in some of the geeky stuff, some of the science in there, some cool challenges. So anyway, I'm making one that's just for you West Coast folk. It'll be at a convenient time for you, more than East Coast time. Anyway, and I'm looking forward to having people join that flock there. It's called Talking with Birds, and you can get there on my Instagram, Lead with Nature. You can get there on my Facebook page, my website, leadwithnature.com. Hope to see some of you there.
Fantastic. And I also want to mention a resource for folks that have children aged 7 to 10. There is a program called Secret of the Jay with Christy Duran-Guinness online.
Yeah.
So check that out. It's a great way to introduce bird language to some of our younger community members.
Yeah, that's at birdmentor.com is Christy's work. She does great stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. And if you want to do a self-paced online program, H Yields also offers a bird language online program, and you can also find a link to that on the Audubon California website in our bird language page. And again, we will be coming out with more bird language content through Audubon California. Stay tuned. We'll announce that as things become live, likely in June or July. And in between now and May 22nd, we're in our Bird Sit Challenge. So again, join us on Instagram Live. We invite you to do a bird sit each day between now and then. Again, even just a minute counts. Join us Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1 p.m. on Instagram Live, Audubon CA. And, again, take this, run with it. May your bird sits bring you calm, connection, and curiosity. And what secrets will the birds reveal to you? And how many songs might you sing by the end of this 30-day bird sit challenge?
Yeah.
But again, Dan, thank you so much. We've been so honored to have you here.
Thanks.
And is there anything you want to say as we sign off here?
Thank you, California Audubon. You folks are awesome. This has been a lot of fun. Hope to be doing more work with you in the future. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks all for being here, and take good care.
Bye.